I'm Muhammad Najat bin Abdul Rahim. I'm a research director at Selby Private Limited. The two approved vaccines are fully synthetic. They consist of two parts. One, the outer layer of packaging, which is made of lipids, and in the middle, there's actually a cargo of mRNA. And they are fully synthetic in the sense that the lipid is actually chemically modified from chemicals and plants to the extent that even the cholesterol is modified from a plant base. And the mRNA itself is actually synthesized using animal-free systems. So there's no use of any animal cells in the production of the mRNA. So this is unlike the existing vaccines the more common vaccines, which are based on inactivated or attenuated versions of the bacteria or the virus. So first we need to go back to the central dogma. Okay, the central dogma states that from DNA, then you move on to RNA, and from RNA, it will then translate to proteins. So the genetic makeup of our body, that information is actually coded in DNA. And this DNA is the one that programs our what our body does. So these two vaccines are actually RNA vaccines, and these RNA vaccines cannot make a U-turn or go back to be DNA in our body. So in that sense, we can't mutate because of the RNA vaccine that is introduced into our body. Of course, we can trust the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine. In fact, it is a very special story for COVID. It got many different countries, it got many different companies, it got many different donors and philanthropists to come and work together, because we see there is a very, very important impact on the world. So what happened is that because everyone started working together, because volunteers came on board in hard-hit countries, we were able to have enough people to volunteer to join in the studies. We had enough companies and groups building up different types of vaccines for investigation, and this was allowed because and this was done very quickly because the traditional phases of clinical trials were done in parallel instead of in sequence. Because it was done in parallel, instead of waiting for each phase to complete, which can take about 3 years, different phases could start earlier than before. And why was it possible for you to actually start the different phase before time? It was only because of very good safety data, very good efficacy data that came about. So you think about it, for phase 3 clinical trials, you need tens of thousands, in fact 40,000 on each of the group. So you have 40,000 getting the placebo, another 40,000 getting the actual vaccination. To recruit 80,000 people takes time. So instead of waiting for phase 1 and phase 2 to complete, the recruitment was started earlier. So this allowed the study to actually be done in parallel. Whereas if you take the example of a normal commercial drug, what happens is that the commercial company is actually just mostly interested in, I wouldn't say mostly interested, but very interested in the cost of producing the vaccine. So they'll be very careful. They'll first make sure that phase 1 is fully completed, then we get very good safety data, and then phase 2 will be completed so that you have very good safety, very good safety data for a larger population, and you have a sense of what dose is needed for the particular drug. And then in phase 3, you need to recruit so many people, so it's going to cost a lot of money. So you make sure that everything is, all the risks that comes from the previous phases have already been settled. So instead of waiting for this to happen, the process was done in parallel, and we could actually get our vaccines much faster. The two vaccines that have been approved have an efficacy value or vaccine efficacy of about 95%. So what does that mean? It means that the people who are vaccinated have a 95% less chance of getting infected, falling sick from COVID-19 compared to those who did not receive the vaccine. The important term here is risk. Okay? It does not mean that from the study, 5% of the people who received the vaccine actually fell sick is not true. Okay, in fact, the absolute the numbers were about 0.04% of those who received the vaccine actually got infected. So it does not mean that 5% of those who get the vaccine will be infected. It just relates to the risk. Yes, it is safe, and in fact, the elderly is the population that we actually want to get vaccinated first, right after your frontliners, right after your healthcare workers, right after those whose job put them at risk. And this is because the elderly are more susceptible to a lot of different infections, including COVID-19. So let's not just look at Singapore. We could look all over the world. Most countries will actually vaccinate the elderly first, because the biggest gain from the vaccination in terms of protecting, it will come from protecting the elderly. Okay, so every vaccine has side effects, and it might surprise you, but even the red bump at the injection site can be classified as a side effect. So when you read report about side effects, you need to be very clear that this includes things like the red bumps, it includes things like fever, it includes the headache and the stress that you are subjected to when you actually take the vaccine. So let's not be too distracted by the numbers. More importantly, we need to distinguish the severe side effects. For example, anaphylaxis. So if you have anaphylaxis, you need to have 2 out of the following 3 conditions. First, hives or swelling in your mouth, your lips, your eyelids, inside your throat, your face. And also, it can be accompanied with dizziness, or also it can be accompanied with difficulties in breathing. So that is anaphylaxis. This is very different from seafood allergy, for example. And if you have been prescribed or have been told to use or bring an EpiPen, that means that you have been identified to actually have a risk of anaphylaxis or have had a history of anaphylaxis. The anaphylaxis rates also have been pretty low. So we're looking at about 2 to 6 cases of anaphylaxis per million doses. So the numbers are actually very, very low for those who qualify for the vaccination. And more importantly too, there have been no deaths attributed to any of the 2 vaccines that have been approved. So if you only have asthma, allergic rhinitis, eczema, it is safe. If you only have food allergy that does not lead to anaphylaxis, you can go ahead. And if you are unsure at any point in time, do visit your doctor for assurance. And if you are concerned and have had a history of allergic reaction to other type of vaccines, you are in a very special group. You should go down to the vaccination center, and over there you can actually get a referral to a specialist who will actually evaluate if you are eligible for the vaccination, and this referral will be fully subsidized. So apart from anaphylaxis, there are 2 other groups who cannot get vaccinations right now. This can change. So these 2 other groups are those with severely compromised immune system, as well as those with low platelet counts. Okay, actually it is not unsafe. It is more a sense of they have just not been approved for use. So you need to understand that actually to approve the vaccine is actually very, very difficult. So right now, there is no data to suggest, no evidence to suggest based on controlled clinical trials that it is safe for children, or specifically those below 18 years old for the Moderna vaccine and those below 16 for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The reason that this has not been done is because of ethics. Children are protected. They cannot give consent to volunteering for a vaccine or a lot of drugs. So because of that, they were excluded from any of the safety trials, whether in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of these vaccines. So because of this ethical issue, it was not possible to actually include them early in the vaccination trial. But now that we've got very good safety and efficacy data, it is now possible for them to actually join and volunteer in some of these clinical trials, and these trials are currently ongoing, and we look forward to the results of these clinical trials that are happening in the world. So the vaccine has not yet been approved for pregnant women for similar reasons to children. It is ethically not good or ethically not allowed for you to actually do such tests on pregnant women. But for those who have given birth, it is possible for you to actually get the vaccination. The official advice is that if you are breastfeeding, you should stop breastfeeding for 5 to 7 days. But let's say you feel that you are unable to suspend breastfeeding for your baby, but you still wish to actually get a vaccine, you can do so. Those of you who have chronic diseases, you're actually within the group who we actually want you to get the vaccination early. But if you are unsure, you can consult your doctor, and this includes those who have allergy to other kinds of medications. Okay, based on existing evidence, the short answer is yes, you'll be protected against currently circulating strains because you have protective antibodies that work against them after completing your 2 doses. But I think I would like to caution here that the studies which show that the vaccine would prevent transmission to your loved ones has not been completed, and the studies are still ongoing. And we need to take a lot of caution. We need to be careful here because we already know that there is asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19. Okay, so we should be careful and still continue to implement safety measures and continue complying with all the directives which will reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19. Yes, the 2 vaccines actually should protect you against the new variant B.1.1.7. There is no evidence at this time that both the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines are not protective against the new COVID-19 variants B.1.1.7.